Story 1. When I lived in Hawaii, there were protests on the Big Island against building a new 30-meter telescope on top of Mauna Kea next to other telescopes. The native Hawaiians believe the mountain is sacred, and the new telescope would be a desecration. The Hawaii Army National Guard was called up in case local law enforcement needed assistance. I talked to a few of them, and it was tough because they supported the protesters. In fact, one of them said his dad was protesting. It was a difficult situation, but the senior officers were as sensitive as they could be. Story 2. I am reminded of a fire chief who, after extinguishing a fire at a protest, was instructed by the police to turn the hoses on the protesters. "We fight fires, not Americans," the chief replied and left. Story 3. No one who is actually in the military or National Guard will respond, especially negatively. They could possibly be subjected to discipline, including court-martial, depending on what they say. Story 4. He died last year, but one of my dad's best stories was from his Air National Guard days when someone in his unit accidentally tear-gassed the basement of his post, causing subsequent chaos. What he only ever mentioned once, almost in shame, was that it was during the 1968 Washington riots, when he was one of approximately 1,700 District of Columbia National Guardsmen called up by President Lyndon B. Johnson after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and the ensuing unrest. Only once did he detail having to mount an M2 machine gun to a Jeep and drive through burning streets in the Capitol. There was much more, but the story isn't the point. It is the clear discomfort he still felt telling me about it in the 2010s. It wasn't a war story or anything of pride, but something from early in his very long life that greatly impacted him. Story 5. Was deployed during city protests in 2021. Honest truth? I spent every second reminding myself that these were my fellow Americans exercising their constitutional rights. The same rights I swore to defend. The irony was not lost on me. Story 6. I was in the military once. I swore an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I took that oath seriously. I hope current military members feel the same way. Story 7. Search the concept of the banality of evil. Many Holocaust survivors were shocked to discover how ordinary and regular their tormentors were. They were not cartoonishly evil villains with twirling mustaches who hated Jews, but painfully average men and women showing up to work, following orders, and collecting a paycheck. They focused on performing their jobs efficiently and remaining productive. These are the kinds of people found in the military. Many joined because they had no other financial options. Due to a lack of education, many lack the critical thinking skills to understand the larger consequences of their actions. Additionally, they are trained to follow orders immediately. Story 8. I was a first-class petty officer in the United States Navy. The fact that this is a serious question makes me sick. Not the fact that you are asking, but the fact that you felt it needed to be asked. I enlisted in 2014. This is not the same country I swore an oath to protect then. In these comments, people are pretending that former President Barack Obama was openly disrespecting the Constitution. Story 9. As a military member from another country, this is nightmare fuel for me. You do not deploy against your own people. They are the ones you deploy to protect. Story 10. Former military with many friends in the National Guard still. The orders are typically just to hold a certain area. It begins with a show of force. Then, if things develop like mass teenagers throwing rocks or cars being set on fire, for example, your job is to regain control of the scene and protect life and limb. You use crowd control measures to disperse or apprehend those people. This never looks pretty and is never easy because the other party has a say in the ordeal. Many people are not there to aggress but to protest, document, and so on. Some only become aggressive or violent in response to crowd control efforts. So it is a real mess. But at the end of the day, the decision makers are rarely going to back down altogether. So it gets much messier and more violent before it gets better. Story 11. If my service was anything to go by, conservative-minded individuals tend to enlist and stay in longer than more liberal individuals. Even the reasonable ones can have a bad day from believing misinformation. I remember the day I heard an experienced sergeant talk about how January 6th was staged by anti-fascist activists, and how another sergeant mockingly coughed on me when the pandemic was at its peak. They are probably excited to be reclaiming America. Story 12. The number of active duty military and National Guard personnel with experience in a contested domestic protest is not zero, but it is very close to zero. I would take every answer here with caution and skepticism, regardless of position. Story 13. If we reach the point where our military is shooting at American civilians, a civil war and mass unrest will follow. That is how these events unfold. We will find out if our military personnel will blindly decide to follow a wannabe dictator. Story 14. No longer a guard, but that's a no for me. However, that would not stop other members. Unfortunately, it is gang mentality, and the individual would be worried about military law and consequences for not following orders. They are risking their own livelihood, including income and potential prison time. Story 15. Former military. Many men I knew in the service were eager for their hero moment using their guns. I am very worried for Los Angeles. Story 16. My brother is a Guard service member. He is very supportive of Make America Great Again, as are large parts of the military. They will enjoy it. I had to break contact with him. Story 17. I'm not National Guard, but I can speak of the thoughtfulness of one person I met during the floods of Kentucky in 2022. He was the only one in the regiment who kept his gun unloaded. It stood out to me, and after watching for 17 days, I finally asked him why he kept an unloaded pistol. I said, "Everyone here is loaded to the max except you." He said, "These are my people, these hungry people, these are hurt people. I'm not here to cause any more pain. We are here to protect. I, like them, have nothing to fear here. I hope that the National Guard is filled with more Sergeant Stones." Story 18. Active duty United States Army here. I have a lot to say. Currently, Donald Trump is using the Alien Enemies Act to justify his authoritarian immigration and customs enforcement actions. The problem with that is the act has very strict conditions that must be met before its invocation. Namely, that we first be under active invasion by an organized, armed force from another government or country. Trump's claim that Mara Salvatrucha is invading us fails to meet the criteria. 2 federal judges have already ruled on this. This means that every instance of deportation without proper due process is unlawful. Therefore, citizens have every right to protest this. But this administration is continuing on as if they are not blatantly violating the tenets of our democracy. They are daring anyone to stop them, and so far it has only been citizens who answer the call to action. God bless them. These protests should be sending a clear message to this administration. We do not want you here because you are violating our liberty, but this administration is deaf to such. Hegseth has already discussed sending United States Marines to support immigration and customs enforcement in Los Angeles, and one of Donald Trump's executive orders a few months ago suggested he was willing to send active duty military to quell protests. Again, this is unlawful. The protesters would have to be engaging in insurrection or violence on such a scale that the state cannot control it in order to justify active duty troops on our soil. Insurrection is clearly not happening, and the violence is in no way uncontrollable. The worst I saw were a few rocks thrown at immigration and customs enforcement vehicles, but I am sure there was more violence of that nature elsewhere. Not exactly uncontrollable. Yes, the protesters who commit crimes should be punished, but that is the duty of state law enforcement, not the military. There was no indication that the state was not up to the task. This is the Los Angeles Police Department we are talking about. They know how to crush protests. Yet, the president took autonomy away from the state almost immediately, before the police even had a chance to do their job. And since then, the situation has gotten much worse. Everything you are seeing on the news right now is Donald Trump's responsibility. If he wants to take control of the situation away from the state, then he must also take accountability for everything happening at these protests. Anyway, we in the United States Army have not yet been deployed to protests, but the possibility has weighed heavily on my mind for months. So what is going through my mind? that I took an oath to defend the Constitution and my fellow citizens against threats both foreign and domestic. I am therefore duty-bound to refuse any order that would violate the law or the Constitution. A boy took that oath 10 years ago, not understanding what it meant. But now I am a man, and I realize how blessed that boy was to promise to defend something so noble. And it makes my path very simple. If Hegseth has his way, and I am ordered to squash peaceful protests, then I must refuse that order. My oath demands it. My choices, my fears do not come into it, and I will likely wind up in Leavenworth. At best, I will be discharged. My family will lose their breadwinner. My special needs child will stop getting the United States Army-funded therapy which has helped him grow into a fine boy. It is difficult. I am losing sleep. I am crying a lot, and I do not have a choice. I can only pray that enough of my brothers and sisters remember their own oaths should it come down to it. But based on the way they speak and act, I am not hopeful. So this is what has been going through my mind, original poster. All of this, on a loop, for months. Edit. Had a little more to say. Edit 2. The United States Marines have been deployed. My heart hurts. Story 19. I am a veteran. I swore an oath to the Constitution, and I am proud of my service, my achievements, awards, recognitions, and deployments. I am deeply proud of what I have done for this country. Personally, I would be offended if I were told by the Commander-in-Chief to go against the Constitution, ignore everything I have seen during my time in service, and reduce me to nothing more than a toy soldier pointing my weapon at civilians because he says so. Sorry, but that is not the oath I took. I would never be a part of that. Even if it meant breaking a law and receiving a dishonorable discharge, it would be better than shooting a civilian on American soil as an American soldier following an unlawful executive order. That is outside of our oath. If what Donald Trump was doing were legal, he would not have to create a memorandum filled with bureaucratic, nonsensical language to give himself full authority to declare martial law without using those words. Barack Obama and Joe Biden deported people from our country as well, but they did it the legal way with due process. Neither Obama nor Biden would have been able to get away with what Trump is doing. It is insane that people compare Obama and Biden to Trump when it comes to immigration. Two presidents acted legally and one did not. It is foolish to compare them, which I have seen many people do while trying to justify Trump's actions. It is a complete cult mentality. Our Marines undergo intense training, and to have them pulled from duty to play GI Joe because someone wants them to shoot people who disagree with him, how demeaning is that? None of their service, awards, or deployments matter. They are reduced to personal little toy soldiers playing dress-up to shoot Americans who hurt someone's feelings. I hate this so much. Story 20 ex-military here. We are not all supporters of Make America Great Again. I would never fire on a crowd, and I would probably take any officer into custody who told me to do so. Just following orders does not work anymore. Story 21. These people in uniform are not all there because of some moral obligation to serve this country. For most, it is the only occupation they are qualified for that offers stable income and great benefits. We need to stop having the default perception that our law enforcement officials and people in uniform are all honest and honorable men and women. Story 22. The military needs to arrest at least one of these individuals. He is on camera literally turning, aiming, and shooting an Australian reporter. Clear as day on camera. This is an unprovoked attack ordered by former President Donald Trump. Story 23. Remember, nobody cared when "I was just following orders" was used repeatedly during the Nuremberg trials. I do not believe in a higher power, but you will face judgment for your actions. The law is not a moral compass, and neither is your obligation or oath to a fascist authoritarian regime. There comes a point when you need to ask yourself, do you pick that rifle up or throw it to the ground and say, "This is wrong"? Remember this next time you are watching Donald Trump's birthday military parade as if you like it in some kind of Tiananmen Square or Pyongyang parade. This is the banality of evil, and you are all playing a key part in the destruction and bastardization of your country. Story 24. We need to have a comprehensive understanding of the situation and rules of engagement. Unlike police officers, we do not receive qualified immunity. Story 25. My brother served a decade in the Army Infantry with multiple tours and 2 years in the National Guard before exiting. They were deployed for hurricane relief and another mission for unrest. Their weapons were not actually loaded during those times, but they had ammunition in their kits. They also carried many non-lethal options. His view was that, at the end of the day, they were not there to harm people but to maintain presence, hold territory, and protect areas from looting. However, they would not tolerate being attacked. For example, they would not go to jail on someone else's behalf, but they also would not allow their ability to provide for their families to be taken away. Many people do not understand that officers in the field can and do make decisions as situations unfold and are not seeking domestic combat. Story 26. The police are the ones to worry about. They start trouble and then involve the National Guard so they can drag them into a conflict the police intentionally created. Story 27. There is no just following orders. There is only choosing to follow orders. You make a choice. Pray it is righteously made. Story 28. There's only one question that should be going through their mind. Am I upholding and defending the Constitution of the United States? They all swore that oath. They do not have to follow an illegal or unconstitutional order. They did not swear to obey the president, Congress, a general, or a billionaire. Those are facts, not opinions. I am also a veteran who swore to that oath. Story 29. I am National Guard. Leaving politics aside, let's look at 2020. I was not in any of the places where the initial events occurred. However, people were breaking windows, looting businesses, and trying to break into or destroy a police station. I had no problem being sent to protect the law-abiding citizens and the police station from such actions. This did not involve fighting anyone. It mostly involved being a presence and acting as a human fence using shield wall tactics without firearms. The police handled tear gas and crowd dispersal. We freed up police officers from perimeter duty so they could engage actively. The general attitude among the police was that standing in the street and yelling is a First Amendment right, but pushing barricades, throwing lit fireworks, or damaging private property requires action. I am not confident that this viewpoint will hold true with the federal authorities now. The current administration does not respect the Bill of Rights unless a court mandates it. For 2020, despite being a state that leans Democratic, our governor called out the National Guard almost immediately. Regardless of the issue, no one will sit back and allow a riot if the local police cannot handle it. Story 30. Every time people say the military will not fire on Americans, they are dreaming. They will do whatever their superiors tell them to do. Story 31. I was on standby for Philadelphia when the George Floyd riots were happening. Luckily, I wasn't called to go. As for my feelings on it, we were only there to keep the peace, ensure things did not get out of hand, and stay as neutral as possible. People dehumanize the military and fail to realize we are all from different walks of life with varying worldviews. I would say a good portion sympathizes with the protesters, but it is our responsibility to remain neutral. Story 32. When I was in, everyone in the unit was generally against the government. What they usually do is take your rural unit and place you in an unfamiliar city. Despite being in the United States, it feels foreign, and when people start to attack you, the switch flips. It happens to really nice people overseas all the time. The attitude of, if they don't care, I don't care can creep in. Story 33. I will answer this question as neutrally as possible. Yes, I am a current service member. I will not respond to any rhetoric, exaggeration, or engagements in bad faith. I am more than happy to address respectful, good faith questions. This question itself is not a good faith question, but that is not the point. First, you are not called up to fight against civilians at protests, so let's get that out of the way. The simple reality is that having to perform any kind of domestic peacekeeping or enforcement actions is difficult. You are bound by law to obey lawful orders, and no opinion on whether someone fits a particular label affects an order that is lawful on its face. Any challenges to the legality of this mobilization are for the courts to decide, especially in any kind of gray area. Often, you are being taken from your job, college, or whatever you had going on if you are a National Guard member to stand around and be called names such as fascist, Nazi, or brown shirt and have objects thrown at you. That is difficult too. Contrary to popular belief, if you throw bricks, bottles, or shoot fireworks at them, you will likely be arrested by the federal agents on site. If you shoot at us, yes, we can shoot you, and we very likely will if we can identify who it was. I have no qualms about an act of self-defense, and most people on that line feel the same. A disagreement with the current administration and its policies does not give you the right or justification to attempt to injure or kill anyone being called up for this mission. Other than the occasional tear gas canister, generally, getting physical with protesters as military personnel does not happen unless it is initiated by them. There are strict orders against this, proportionality is observed closely, and often less force is returned than received to avoid negative public relations incidents. So, the long and short of it, getting called up for domestic peacekeeping or enforcement is difficult. It is not a job most people are excited to do, regardless of what you think about the political affiliations of service members. It uproots their everyday lives and jobs and takes them away from their families to perform probably the most unpopular function the military can have. In this environment, it is especially dangerous and volatile. But at the end of all this, everybody wants to go home. So, if you are willing to deny that to other people, be prepared to face that same risk. Story 34. People who are used to thinking would be surprised how little many people are thinking. They just do what they are trained to do. Mostly this happens in other countries, so no one cares. I mean, United States troops doing their thing in other countries, bringing democracy and so forth. Most only start understanding how wrong this is when United States forces start doing it in their own country. Story 35. Not a military member. When I hear Donald Trump's name and riots, they coincide. He loves trouble like this. It keeps the focus off things like himself, Elon Musk, the economy, and tariffs. Keeps the population tense. I still remember January 6th as it relates to Donald Trump and how our fine police officers were unduly injured and their lives were threatened. He subsequently pardoned all the perpetrators. The group that orchestrated the deadly assault on the United States Capitol building in conjunction with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is an anarchist. He is an enemy within. We must get the United States back from him and his associates. Remember, he is not acting alone. He is not that smart. Story 36. May 4th, 1970. We have had the National Guard open fire on American civilian protesters before. History often repeats itself. Story 37. As a decorated combat veteran, this is unacceptable. Forget the Uniform Code of Military Justice as well and the joke at the head of the Department of Defense. When you are enlisted, you are literally government property. I am a super embarrassed, disgusted, and disappointed combat veteran. What a mess. And it is definitely going to get worse. Story 38. Who said we're fighting anyone? We sit on a corner in a line holding riot shields. We get pulled away from our jobs and families, many of us taking a pay cut in the process, to sleep outside on the ground and get fed poor quality food. During this, we get objects thrown at us and called every name in the book. And why? Because adults don't know how to behave responsibly. Reality check. The world is difficult. The leaders of the world are all flawed, whether left or right. The leaders of our states are incompetent and only care about themselves and those loyal to them higher up the hierarchy. Politics do not exist to benefit ordinary people. The world is only going to get worse. Prepare yourself. Story 39. This will be buried, but here it is. One of my brothers is in the National Guard. I no longer speak with him, but I do know he believes these people are traitors and should do as they are told. If he could get away with harming or killing these people under the guise of orders, he absolutely would. Many others in his squad or platoon are the same way. This is the Texas National Guard we are speaking about, so I do not know about other National Guard units. However, many along with my brother have zero critical thinking skills or the ability to think for themselves. They believe might makes right and that orders are to be followed and obeyed. They love violence and having power over others. They believe that people who protest the government, mostly liberals, need to go away, preferably permanently. It is very depressing, but I know that many in the military would not only hesitate to gun down civilian protesters. They would take a lot of pleasure in doing so. Even if they do not like Donald Trump, They are loyal to him and his regime and consider it preferable to having a socialist Democrat in charge. Story 40. Honestly, it must be such a conflict. Being trained to protect people, but then things get complicated when protests happen. It is about following orders while also hoping everything stays peaceful. It is hard to turn off empathy, though. It must be tough balancing duty with personal feelings. Story 41. My sister-in-law was in the Veterans Affairs National Guard and was mobilized by the government during the January 6th insurrection. She was deeply traumatized by the experience and began the discharge process as soon as possible. Story 42. I am so relieved I am a veteran. There is an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. I am worried about those who believe shooting unarmed American civilians on our soil is lawful. Story 43. I was at the Freddie Gray Baltimore riots. I had a few roles, one in particular in front of City Hall. We had live rounds, but were instructed not to shoot unless someone jumps over the barricades, tries to steal your weapon, or shoots first. You stay over there, I stay over here. Fine with me. Story 44. What is not going through their mind is the oath they took to uphold the Constitution. They have all broken that, but it was probably just words to them. Story 45. Alternative news outlets are preparing the rhetoric that liberals will open fire on a mob of protesters and frame "Make America Great Again" supporters for it. So beware of agitators and false flag events that help fuel the protests. Story 46. For anyone sorting by new, it looks like they are sending in over 700 United States Marines. Story 47. I served 10 years, including 7 years on active duty and 3 years in the National Guard. I completed a combat tour in Afghanistan, earned the rank of Staff Sergeant, and developed a leadership style prior to transitioning to the National Guard. To answer your question, leadership is key in the military. Having dealt with insurgencies and people actively trying to kill me, I never viewed protesters as enemies. Furthermore, I ensured my team leaders understood that I would not allow an us versus them mindset to take root. My platoon knew and respected this, as I was the only one who had deployed, including the platoon leader. When we were called to manage protests, my platoon remained respectful, kind, and professional while keeping themselves safe. These people are our own, from our home state, exercising the rights we swore to defend. That matters more than anything else. The minute they lost that respect and treated them like combatants is the moment the situation changes into something else. Story 48. Former Navy. Never had to deal with this, but thought about it a bit. Just fighting a war I did not agree with in general. I do not know who is right and who is wrong. Even now with the protests, if I go on Reddit, of course, they are going to say the protests were nonviolent. And if I go on Fox News, of course, they are going to say radical and rioting. I have no idea who is right. So I would just do my job and make sure nobody around me got hurt. There is no crystal ball saying which side is the good side. It is just one person's belief or the other. You may hate immigration and customs enforcement, but are people here illegally? What do you do about that? You may love immigration and customs enforcement, but aren't we all immigrants? Does not everybody deserve a better life? Story 49. This is the main reason why I am leaving. I will not deploy to fight against the people of this country or to protect fascism. Story 50. Not a direct answer to the original poster's question, but some general history that feels relevant. Back when the Nazi war machine was rolling through Europe, even during the final solution, individual soldiers in the Schutzstaffel and police units would sometimes refuse to shoot civilians. It happened often enough that commanders would usually ask for volunteers instead of giving direct orders. If nobody stepped up, sometimes no one did it. Peer pressure worked both ways. Those who refused were often looked down on by their peers, and many went along because of that. But it was surprisingly common for soldiers to say no. The punishments were essentially a slap on the wrist, such as demotion, pay cut, or reassignment to a different unit. This was rare, and insubordination was not always punished. I do not see why the National Guard or Marine Corps would act any differently. They will be given orders to fire upon, arrest, cull, or otherwise act, and some will be abhorrent to it, others will be eager, and many will simply adhere to peer pressure from those around them. Story 51. Laughing out loud, what a loaded question. When you are called to fight against civilians at protests, yes, I'm sure the orders say exactly that. Report at 0600 we are being called up to commit war crimes. Make sure your uniform looks crisp. Come on, even if you seriously think that is why the decision was made to call them up, don't you think their orders are more along the lines of defending public property against rioters, protecting the safety of government employees and the general public from violent rioters, assisting official police officers conducting legitimate law enforcement, and so on? Story 52. Imagine how wonderful it would be if the National Guard showed up and stood with the people, because Guard members are members of families, communities, churches, and neighborhoods. We are on the same side. Story 53. I am in the Navy, not the National Guard, but one of the National Guard's roles is to fight domestic threats and quell civil unrest. Posts that say things like, "I can't believe Donald Trump is sending the military against Americans," do not understand how the National Guard and the military work. If people are stopping immigration and customs enforcement agents from properly arresting and detaining individuals, then I think it is acceptable to send the National Guard in, especially if people are becoming violent. However, based on everything I have seen and read, immigration and customs enforcement is not following the law properly, and people are right to be upset and protest. There is nuance to this. Story 54. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the military lean very conservative and openly support Donald Trump and his policies. They see no problem with suppressing protests. It is the commanding officers who will make the difference between security and chaos. Story 55. As a National Guard officer, let me tell you that these types of mobilizations happen literally all the time, but most people, even within the military, are not privy to it. Story 56. My wife wanted to go National Guard to get her citizenship. I was able to show her the nature of things, and she quickly decided not to, and told the recruiter that with everything going on right now, she didn't feel comfortable enlisting. The recruiter was a Hispanic woman. The day after the Los Angeles events kicked off, the recruiter called her asking if she was still interested in joining the Guard. There are Guard members on social media expressing approval while watching brown people getting tackled and arrested. Even the Hispanic people are indifferent, focused on their own interests. Before I was banned on Facebook, I was in the middle of a heated argument with a man in the Tennessee National Guard who posts racist and bigoted content every day to his comrades. People who do not support this but do not raise their concerns and make their objections known are complicit. The only good Guardsmen are those who turn their rifles on traitors. Story 57. Something I think most people do not consider is that the oath of office is not to protect the American people or the American government. It is to protect the United States Constitution. The biggest threat to the United States Constitution is the Republican Party and the administrative branch of the United States government. Story 58. I served in the military, and I can tell you from experience that soldiers are just as scared and confused as the protesters. They do not want to be there, but they have to be there. However, if they are given an order to shoot civilians, they must disobey that order because it is unlawful. Story 59. Just do the job. Protesting is allowed, but throwing bricks at people and buildings is not an acceptable form of protest and will be dealt with. Story 60. Retired Marine here. You support the country regardless of who you vote for. Immigration and customs enforcement is enforcing laws agreed upon by both parties. As soon as the protesters get violent, they are hostile, disrupting the enforcement of existing laws. Story 61. Former active duty and National Guard member here. A little story for you. No surprise, Army guys like to play paintball. We were at one of those huge games when the other team got behind us. It took me a minute, but I realized they were not on our side, so I started calling out positions and shooting back. Later that day, my buddy said something that has really haunted me since. Joe told me he could not comprehend how fast I went from standing around to fighting back and barking out orders to our team. It took me a couple of minutes to really understand what he was saying. Joe was shocked at how I went from 0 to 11 on the violence scale. I reacted faster than he could comprehend and got the rest of our team to respond so quickly that even though the other guys snuck up behind us, we rolled over them with our response. I automatically responded with my military training and experience even though it had been over 10 years. The United States Army National Guard is not a joke. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan forged that organization into a proper combat-ready machine. When I was in the Guard, it was full of former active duty Army and Marine Corps members. Going into a situation like that is quite simple. You resort back to training, and the Guard is a combat-tested organization. Once they are deployed, they are going to crack skulls because they are soldiers. Even if it is the military police and not infantry, they are mentally and psychologically conditioned for violence. Not like civilian police who may resort to excessive force. Soldiers are trained to win a fight to the death. Once a fight breaks out, guardsmen and women are going to resort to their training. What goes through your mind in a fight? It is, how do I neutralize this threat? Simple. Beat this person until they stop breathing. The military recruits people aged 18 to 24 years old. A new officer is basically 23 or 24. Their brains have not even fully developed yet. As a nation, we spent the last 20 years praising the military. Well, the nation is now at a stage of reckoning. That trillion-dollar military budget needs to be spent somewhere, and if we are abandoning Ukraine, that does not mean the toys get put away in storage. Story 62. I'll probably get downvoted since Reddit is skewed left, but here is your answer from an infantry Marine veteran. The Alien and Sedition Acts provide enough legal justification where I would not consider the act of being there unconstitutional. This justification was used during the Rodney King riots to deploy Marines in the past. That being said, it's unpleasant to just stand around holding a riot shield all day while people yell nonsense at you and you are not allowed to respond. You are better off having the National Guard or military at your protest, as we are more disciplined than riot police and will just stand there until you do something blatantly dangerous. Story 63. I was a National Guard member called up due to the protests in 2020. To your specific question of what goes through your mind if you are called to fight against civilians at protests, the answer in my case, and unless the officer in charge of the operation is completely incompetent, is that we are never called to fight protesters. That would be blatantly illegal. You are activated for what is called direct support for civil authorities, a mission set specific to only the National Guard. This generally involves showing presence at events that have the potential to turn violent or dangerous and acting as crowd or riot control in support of local authorities. What goes through my mind during a mission like that is that I am there to support people's right to demonstrate and protest peacefully and safely. I think that is generally true for most people in these situations. Social media does not show many images of police or guardsmen standing around bored at shopping malls with nothing going on. You mostly see the negative incidents. Story 64. I was active duty. I couldn't imagine it for multiple reasons. First, it is a complete waste of my time as an infantryman. Secondly, it is contradictory to your oath of enlistment and against the Constitution. Story 65. As a veteran, we take the same oath. Any order to suppress or attack protesting Americans should be disregarded as an unlawful order. It is our duty to protect the First Amendment rights granted by the Constitution we swear allegiance to, therefore protecting the protesters exercising their rights. Story 66. These are riots, not protests. Destroying property, attacking people, starting fires. None of this is protesting, and you will only find support from fringe extremists. If you crossed the border illegally, overstayed your visa, or entered the country by any means other than legally, you will be deported. If you are a legal guest in our country and violate the rules of entry, break the law, or support terrorism, you will be deported. Violent outbursts, waving foreign flags, pandering to the media. None of that changes the fact that you are here illegally and will be deported. If you are a citizen aiding and abetting illegal entry, harboring illegal immigrants, or participating in riots, you risk being charged and prosecuted with felony crimes. If you want the immigration system changed, vote for politicians who will pass the laws you want enacted. Millions of otherwise sympathetic people will abandon your cause if your response to setbacks is to throw a temper tantrum. Story 67. Point blank, I have to be there. If I am put into a situation where I have to decide between my life or some protester's life, I am going to choose myself to make it through this. Don't like that? Don't put me in that position. You want to protest, okay. But don't shoot at me, don't light a car on fire and drive it at me, don't try to block my path while I am surrounded, don't charge at me. In general, just keep your distance and do whatever you need to so I can go home. I keep seeing videos labeled as peaceful protests that, if they were happening on my street, I would lock my door and barricade the windows. Peaceful protests make you want to join them, not scare you. This is just an option, and I am going to get criticized for it, but I am tired of seeing things like this. Edit, to clarify, this is what would go through my mind if, as active duty military, I were somehow told to mobilize like the United States Marine Corps. The only information I would have is what is on Reddit, and that I am on standby to do unnecessary tasks. This is all hypothetical, but I wanted to share my perspective and what I believe goes through the minds of some active duty military personnel who would be put into this situation, even if the majority are in support roles and not in combat positions. Story 68. It's when he calls up the National Guard from a red state and sends them to a blue state. That's what the Chinese did for Tiananmen Square. The original armored units were from the areas around Beijing and wouldn't run down people they thought of as comrades, so they ordered some units from the farthest away. Those people saw the protesters as less than comrades. Story 69. Last time I was around a young United States Marine, early 20s, about a year ago, a friend's son. He got into a fight with his girlfriend over nothing. He was sitting in his truck, drinking a beer, yelling that he was not going to go back and apologize to her. Instead, he watched former President Donald Trump on his phone, talking about how he was going to make the country great again, while two former Marines tried to convince him to apologize. She was upset and crying, but eventually got into the truck with him. About 5 minutes later, she called his dad, saying he started yelling at her and then left her in a parking lot. His stepmother had to pick her up and take her to her parents' house for the night. They were at least a 30-minute drive from home. So that is my baseline for young United States Marines currently. This all happened at the Marine Corps birthday ball, where you would think he should have been on his best behavior after being recognized as the youngest Marine there and being given the honor of cutting the cake with the oldest Marine present. Story 70. I was active duty for 27 years. I worked daily with Air National Guard members, and I feel comfortable saying the vast majority of them would be against what this administration is asking them to do. There were a couple that would have definitely supported Make America Great Again. Story 71. You realize this is one of the functions of the National Guard and has happened numerous times in the past. Story 72. Maybe a better question might be, as a citizen, when you go to a protest to set things on fire, loot stores, and fight the people providing security, what is going through your mind? Story 73. Judging by what is happening there, the attitude is, yes, I get to harm some people and shoot my gun. Story 74. I served in New Orleans in 2005. I would be glad to answer any questions you might have. That was a different mission. I am sure I will receive some preconceived accusations, but feel free to ask. Story 75. I am a retired National Guard member. I have never personally been called up for riot control but have trained for it and sent soldiers from units I have served in to do it. For the most part, the National Guard takes a back seat to law enforcement. They are more there for presence. They are not given tear gas, pepper spray, or rubber bullets. At times, they may have live rounds, but with strict use of force guidelines. The unusual part is they are activated under Title 10, which is federal authority, whereas situations like this usually fall under state authority or Title 32. There are more restrictions on what they can do under Title 10. Troops who do not follow orders can be disciplined much more severely under federal orders. In the past, National Guard members have shown more restraint in situations like this than local and federal law enforcement. They are the ones I would be more concerned about. Story 76. I imagine they are still trying to figure that out themselves. Considering that this has not happened since the 1960s, I am sure most of them never thought they would have to do something like this. Story 77. I will tell you what my father would have done. He served 26 years and made a point of discussing this with my brother and me. He would have refused an unlawful order. For those who are unfamiliar with what constitutes an unlawful order, it includes targeting civilians, orders to suppress lawful protests, orders that conflict with the Constitution, and orders that violate international law. He would have been assigned to crowd control or something similar, but he would not have fired upon civilians, even with less lethal munitions. Story 78. Thank you all for your comments. A correction on the question from the feedback in the comments. National Guard and military members. When you are deployed to a city where protests are happening, what is going through your minds? Story 79. As a guardsman who has been activated twice for civil unrest related to the George Floyd incident, I think I can answer this. People in my unit were shocked, excited, angry, scared, but mostly bored. When the protests first happened, we were all mentally preparing to do a national training center rotation, so we were blindsided by the protests, especially since my old unit was never activated for anything stateside. Many of us were excited because, for the majority, it was the first time we were doing something real-world and not just training. People were also angry for several reasons. Nearly everyone was upset that we lost the last week of free time with our families before going to the National Training Center, and we had to rush to repack everything we had just packed the month prior. My closest friend in the unit was really angry since his son was just born, and he had to leave to go sit around and do nothing before leaving his family again for a month. I was angry at times, like when we were briefed that all of the rioters who had been arrested were from out of state, when I heard that someone tried to set my cousin's apartment building on fire, or when we were told that a white supremacist militia had come up from Texas to start a race war. But the one thing consistent both times we were activated was that we were really bored. I should note that it was also the first time many of us actually interacted with the Minneapolis Police Department. We were assigned to officers from 3 different precincts. While the officers from 2 of the precincts were all right, after interacting with the officers from North Minneapolis, I can say that I understand why anyone would protest them. Those officers were terrible. We also got some pretty good memes out of it. Story 80. Just a reminder, in Donald Trump's own words, about legally deploying the National Guard. Story 81. I did not fight against civilians, but I personally operated in a more logistical capacity. Most of us supported the protesters. Unsurprisingly, the National Guard also has many current and former law enforcement officers, and usually those individuals were the ones most willing to use force if necessary. I was in an infantry unit, so I was probably surrounded by many people who were less sympathetic to the protesters. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.